Welcome to the Power of Your Mind podcast. I'm Victoria Gallagher, your host. Have you been attempting to use law of attraction or hypnosis to attract financial abundance, a soulmate, or career success? Would you like to be happy, motivated, and successful? Have better health, enjoy more fulfilling relationships, overcome struggle, and gain mastery over your life? Then join me on this amazing self-help podcast where you'll unleash the power of your mind. I'll be sharing 20 years of wisdom and techniques of hypnotherapy, law of attraction, visualization, meditation, personal growth, positive affirmations, and other effective methods to help you tap into the great power which resides in your mind and become the best version of yourself. Well, hello and welcome to today's episode of the Power of Your Mind podcast. You're listening to episode number 104. I'm Victoria Gallagher, Law of Attraction hypnotist and best-selling author of Practical Law of Attraction, Align Yourself with the Manifesting Conditions and Successfully Attract Your Desires. I'm also the founder of HipTalk.com and HypnoCloud apps, which gives you access to over 500 hypnosis recordings right in the palm of your hand. So be sure to download that app from the iTunes and Google Play stores. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Mary Hyatt. Mary Hyatt is a life and business mindset coach who specializes in helping high-achieving female entrepreneurs move from living a life of burnout to a life where they are connected to their emotions, their body, and their spirit. She helps bring her one-on-one and group coaching clients back to their enoughness, wholeness, and femininity. Mary is the host of the Living Fully Alive podcast that airs weekly, where she dives deeper into the mindset and helps her listeners learn to embody a life fully lived. She's also a top earner with doTERRA essential oils, helping teach women how to support their bodies and emotions holistically. As a trained hypnotherapist and Kundalini yoga instructor, Mary brings a level of consciousness and soul-focused inner work to everything she does. And she can also be found on the website maryhyatt.com and her Living Fully Alive podcast. And so today, Mary is going to be sharing some of her insights on how to feel and process your emotions, even the scary ones. So welcome to the show, Mary.
Thanks, Victoria. It is so great to be here. And oh man, I know this is going to be a great conversation today.
Yes, it is. I am ready for this conversation. And, you know, this is such an important topic today with all of the emotions that people have that are coming to the surface maybe. And, you know, emotions maybe they didn't even know that they had.
Right. Totally.
And you know, so, but then, you know, you have people that are just, you know, they've got to look strong and they've got to play it strong. And so, you know, why is it that people are so afraid of these emotions?
Yeah, it really is kind of an interesting time. Like if you're listening to this in real time and you know, what are we going into, you know, the middle of the year, and it is so many different events that are happening right now. I mean, just so many. At the time that we're recording this, it's Blackout Tuesday. We just had the death of George Floyd. We had COVID, all that going on. And obviously, I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. So we had a tornado right before then. It's just a lot is swirling around. And it's interesting right now in particular because everything has gone quiet. And what happens with that is all of a sudden we are sort of having to look right in the eyes, face to face with some of the things that we have suppressed, pressed down, ignored, denied, avoided, and those emotions, those difficult emotions. And I know that there are a lot of fears around feeling our emotions. Mm-hmm. And there's good reason for that. Is, you know, there's several different reasons depending on how you were raised. It kind of starts with your family of origin and what was communicated when you were little about feeling your emotions. And I feel like there's a little bit of subtlety difference between what little girls experience about emotions and then what boys experience about emotions. And the general consensus is, right? Like there's messaging that's a little bit different for each, gender. But for boys, it's man up. Don't have emotions. Right. Strong men don't cry. If you cry, suck it up.
Yeah.
That kind of messaging. Where little girls were told to be quiet, to not be too emotional. We never want to be perceived as too emotional. And otherwise, because we are
too
unhinged.
Sensitive.
Too sensitive. Exactly. And so it starts from a really early age. And for most people, unless you had a really beautiful, conscious parent, there was a lot of quieting of the emotions, a lot of, it's not safe to feel. If you started to have like what normal kids have as temper tantrums or meltdowns, there was shame involved in that. There wasn't usually a safe place for holding that kind of emotion. So very early on, we get the message that emotions aren't safe. And to be good little boy, a good little girl, don't be too emotional, don't be too sensitive. So that it kind of starts there.
Yeah.
And then you think about culturally how that's reinforced. How it's reinforced in schools. It's if you're bad, if you're acting out, if you talk too much, if you're too loud, you get sent in a timeout. There's some sort of punishment for being vocal, being emotional. And then all of the shame that comes along, and I particularly talk to women and female entrepreneurs. So I'm kind of in the camp of really looking at how does this affect women? And for women, we have been given the message for a long time. If you're going to be in the workplace, it's sort of like the jokes about women. Oh, must be that time of the month again. She's too emotional, or like just off kind of comments like that.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of derogatory names for women who are angry, who are, especially women of color who are angry, for women who are loud, for women who are emotional, for women who are sensitive, who are able to feel what's going on. So we're getting a lot of messages. So that is kind of the main reason why I think it's really difficult for us to want to go in to explore our emotions. And then the second reason that I find is that we simply don't understand them. We don't understand what they are. We don't understand how to process them. It feels really scary, like especially if you've lived a life where you've buried a lot of these emotions for a long time. It's not safe to begin to kind of like open Pandora's box because we're not sure what we're going to find. And I know that in my journey, I spent years without crying, years without dealing with stuff that was difficult in my life. And the thought of going into some of those painful places, it was like, number one, I'm afraid that if I go there, I'm going to lose it. Like I remember having flashes of like having to be locked up in a psychiatric ward. It was like, I'm going to go crazy. Like that's literally what I thought is if I deal with this, if I open myself up to feeling, they're going to have to lock me up. So there's a real,
it's so true. Yeah. You hear about that. People they're really afraid of these emotions. And I think, that because of that message that we get, early on, we don't even get to explore, see what it's like. And you feel like if I allow myself to feel like this, I'm never going to be able to get out. I'm going to go into some deep abyss. I do remember, one day when I decided I'm just going to go ahead and explore this. Like I just took it on. And because I was so just in a deep, dark place, going through a bad relationship many, many years ago. And I just remember having that fear of like, I may cry forever, I may,
right.
I may, once but I made a choice. I made a decision. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and just let this all go. I'm going to go and see where this takes me and just go and go and go and go and go. And you know what?
Yeah.
As soon as I did that, I was done in 15 minutes.
Right. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
It's like everything that we fear. The length of an emotion that we can feel is about 90 seconds. And what is interesting is when we extend that out and we feel something for longer, it's because that's when we enter into self-rumination. That's when we're sort of playing out scenes in our mind, and it's generating more emotion and more emotion and more emotion. Mm-hmm. But the vibration of an emotion itself, its lifespan is about 90 seconds. Yeah. And I remember I used to struggle horribly with panic attacks. And that was something that like was very common for me. I was on medication for anxiety for a long time. And anytime I experienced a panic attack, and if you've ever had one, or if anybody listening has ever had one, it feels like you're going to die. You know, it's like, I'm never going to get out of this feeling. And I remember my therapist telling me one time, she said, your body cannot sustain that heightened place of emotion for longer than like 15 minutes before there's the come down and you kind of get a little moment of reprieve. And so when I was going through those regularly, I would kind of have to remind myself, like, this isn't going to last forever. I'm not going to die. Like just something as basic as that. Like this will end. There is an end in sight here, even though right now it doesn't feel like it. And it's amazing that when we have the courage, and it really is a courageous act, to feel some of these things that we have been trying to disassociate from, it isn't as intense. I mean, it's intense, but it doesn't consume us in the way that I think we're afraid of. And it does dissipate eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's about just bringing presence to the moment that, and being in touch with all the sensations in your body, and just really just, the more present we can be with something, I think the quicker we're going to move through that.
Yeah. And that is such an amazing, like higher consciousness place to sit with that, sit in the discomfort of it.
Yeah. Well, yesterday, I'll just, because it's so timely. I've gone through this whole like coronavirus season with, feeling pretty strong-minded, pretty, like it has, I've been fairly unemotionally affected, or, I have not, it hasn't impacted me emotionally. I had like a couple rough days, but for the most part, I've been doing pretty good. But man, as soon as this crazy writing and all of that has been broken out, that for me, that's been extremely scary for me. It's been, because I have a very overactive imagination, and just thinking about all of these scenarios, and I'm fine during the day, but then as soon as like it starts to get nighttime, all of a sudden the anxiety had been really kicking in. And so like literally just yesterday, because it's so timely that you're on here today, because just yesterday I said, okay, let's just talk about this to myself. Like, what am I afraid is going to happen? Okay. And it's like, well, I'm afraid somebody's going to freaking break into my house and hurt me. Like that's the word. That's like, I'm afraid of this, I'm afraid of that, but that's bottom line. That's what I'm afraid of. And then but it's like, that's not happening right now.
Right.
But there's a part of me that's experiencing that happening. And that's what's causing that fear and that anxiety. And it's like, and the thing is if we could just be present to what is happening right now. Nothing is happening right now to me in my house. Right. I am, everything is okay. I am okay. And even if, the worst, it's like you put yourself in that moment, and it's like, you can always be present. You always have your breath. You always have whatever you're experiencing right now will always pass. But if we can be present to these emotions. And anyway, I just wanted to share that because it was just like this moment of enlightening, which it didn't help as much as I was hoping to have that moment of insight. I did still have the feeling, but at least I was a little bit more in touch with it and aware that, I'm doing this. I have control over this. And I've had to use my meditation tools quite a lot more, and doing more exercising and doing a lot more to like really, really, and trying to just stop the absorption of the media,
Well, exactly. And, if we were in a live setting with other people watching and listening to this, I'd say, okay, everybody else raise your hand if you've been feeling like Victoria, have you experienced this? And I guarantee you, so many people would say, yes, 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 I'm experiencing this, I'm feeling it. Because I think that's collective. Our nervous systems have been operating in this place of, I like to call it running hot. Yes. Where it's almost like overactive nervous systems. We're very jumpy, in a way, like collectively jumpy. We are kind of at that frazzled place emotionally. And fear is a very common, anxiety is a very common emotion that our brains go to when we sort of have no reserve left. And we start operating from that lizard brain. We start operating from that reptilian brain back here where that executive functioning, the frontal lobe is offline. And so it's fight, flight, or freeze. It's survival brain thinking. And that's when we start playing out those worst case scenarios. What would happen? And what would I do if this happened? And then, as we kind of go down the rabbit hole of that, it intensifies the emotion. It's like throwing gas on that fear, throwing gasoline on the anxiety. And I love that you're bringing up presence, because I think that's such like a beautiful way to create a pause that can immediately give us a little distance from being embodied in the anxiety, in the fear. So what gets tricky is when we're embodied, and I mean like we're feeling it on all levels. We are literally eating it, breathing it, sleeping it. Like that's our state. That is where we exist in that moment, is fully in that fear, fully in that anxiety. But when we can create just a little bit of distance, a little bit of space, and one way of doing that is pausing. And one of the things that I've learned to do for myself when those moments hit is I'll say to myself, find your feet. And what I'm saying what I mean when I say that is like literally like look down and see where you're standing, which is an invitation into presence, which is like right now I'm sitting in my house. I am safe. I have food. I have water. I have all, my basic necessities. I'm okay. And so that just simple phrase of finding my feet, find your feet, Mary, find your feet, Mary, gives me that opportunity to, in a way, almost like go above my body. Yes. And watch myself having the emotional experience, but it creates a little bit of distance where I'm not all in it and I can become above it so that I can get curious and almost treat it like, isn't this interesting? And that's a phrase I use a lot. Isn't it interesting that I am freaking out right now? Like, isn't it interesting that I am so afraid right now? Isn't it interesting that this is a deep core fear somewhere that I didn't even know that I had? And just, again, that little bit of pause to come into reality, like in the times of panic attacks, it's like, what color is the wall? Where's the ceiling? What does it smell like? Is it dark? Is it light? What can you touch? What can you feel? Looking down and noticing what you're wearing, just to, again, bring you into this is what is real. My mind may be somewhere else, but my body is right here. And coming back to those moments and getting curious about what's happening inside of my body, the sensations, you mentioned sensations, the heat that is being generated in my body. That feeling like I'm feeling nauseous is happening in my body. My skin is becoming flush. Those kinds of sensations, or it feels like there's an elephant on my chest. When we begin to observe, it unlocks that part of ourselves that's fully in the experience and helps us come out of it with some perspective. And that presence is so powerful.
If you find value in this personal growth related material, I strongly recommend that you sign up for your $1 trial to my Personal Growth Club. Just head on over to personalgrowthclub.com and get a whole month of premium Personal Growth Club video training materials, meditations. You also get 6 free hypnosis sessions that are valued at over $174, all for this trial of just $1. Even if you cancel, you can keep the 6 hypnosis sessions. That's my gift to you, and that's how confident I am that you are going to love Personal Growth Club. Go to personalgrowthclub.com and start your $1 1-month trial today. It is. By the way, just based on some of the choice of words you're using, have you taken Vipassana meditation?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, because it was interesting because so I've done these 10-day meditation retreats a couple of times,
Yeah.
and it's a silent meditation retreat. And, it is all about observing those sensations, and you're observing, for the first 3 days of that 10 hours a day, all we do is observe just the air coming in and out of our nostrils. You notice the temperature, you notice the, just whether you're breathing more out of the left or the right, or, it's very intricate, detailed. And you get very present, but it was just, and then of course we do move throughout the rest of the body, and you notice all those things. So I was just curious because your wording is very much like versed like that. So I was just curious. One of the things also that, just as an observation, one of the things that kind of helped take me out of this, we watch America's Got Talent, and there was a gentleman on there that was on the show the other night, and his backstory was that he was falsely imprisoned. He was in prison for 37 years. He spent paying the price for somebody else's actions. And the story was so heartfelt that it just made us cry. But I remember something that he had said, and I was thinking about, it's like, the one thing that he never let, he said, because they were asking, like, how did you get through that? And, he's like, there's one thing that you absolutely always have that's yours. Nobody can take away from you. And that is your mind, your ability to think whatever you want to think. And he's like, that there's freedom. As long as I have my mind, I have freedom. And I was like, literally thinking to myself, it's like, God, it's like, how dare I, sit here with these nauseous emotions and anxiety. It's a little self-judgment, I'm human, but, I'm not in prison
right.
for 37 years. And it's like, God, if that guy could, I was just so inspired though. It's like, if that guy could get through that, and he really had no freedom. Here I am, really the greatest country ever, and with all my freedoms, and I can walk in and out of the door if I so choose.
Yeah.
And, I'm not going to give up freedom of my own mind. That's one thing I'm never going to do. Anyway, I'm kind of getting off track, but it feels so relevant right now to share some of what all of us have been experiencing.
Well, and I think you bring up a really good point, and I think this is important to touch on, is that you mentioned, some of that shame that you were feeling, like, how dare I feel XYZ when this person is in this horrible circumstance and finds a way through. And I think what's tricky about that, and this is something that is really common, I notice in a lot of my clients, is they create in their mind good emotion and bad emotion.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, what's the difference between good and bad emotions?
It's really fascinating because, and this is a little bit different depending on who you're talking to, but generally speaking, there is this kind of comes from positive psychology, where there are what I like to call sanctioned emotions and then unsanctioned emotions. And that can exist inside of your family of origin, but it also really, I think, is broader than that too. So for example, happiness is better than fear, or joy is better than anxiety. And so if we kind of begin to create two columns and two categories here, where we've got happiness and joy and fulfillment in the quote unquote good category, then we have anger, maybe sadness, loneliness, bitterness, resentment go into this negative or bad category. So we talk oftentimes about having positive emotions or negative emotions.
Right.
And where I think that there's some helpfulness in that, I think it can become dangerous when we attach morality to emotions. where when we all of a sudden, say this is good and this is bad, because obviously if I start feeling anything in that bad category, guilt, judgment, grief, anger, all of a sudden now that's where that shame gets created, because now listen, I'm bad and I don't have
you shouldn't feel that way. You shouldn't feel that way. Or other people, even out of just trying to console you, they're like, oh, don't feel like that, or you shouldn't feel like that.
Yeah, super tricky. And so you're like, okay, but this is my experience right now. And all of us, I don't know that there's one person who didn't start out from the place of wanting to avoid discomfort.
Yeah.
Right. It's like these, kind of how I think of it, is these emotions don't feel as good, but to me, they're so necessary. They're so necessary to feel and to process through. And I think that the reason that these quote unquote bad emotions get a bad rap is because what we think when we're explaining them is actually self-ruminating on those emotional states to the point where they become destructive. So my argument would be that all emotions are constructive emotions. So if I take out the language of good and bad and go constructive versus deconstructive or destructive, then it's like, oh, when I stay in a state of perpetual anger, that's destructive to me and potentially other people, but first to me. It doesn't feel good. Right? Or if I stay in a state of anxiety forever and ever, or ruminate in that and really get to that place where I'm living that more than I'm not, that's destructive. It's not that it's quote unquote bad. In fact, anxiety, anger are really healthy, constructive emotions, but there's got to be a way for us to process through them and get to the other side. Right. So we don't get stuck in it. So to me, when it becomes bad is when we get stuck in it and we don't know how to move out of it and through it. And so what I really love to teach is to kind of come to a place of neutrality when we're thinking about emotions, that no emotions are good or bad. They're different experiences, different thought processes create these vibrations, these emotions chemically in the body. But when we can kind of neutralize it and say, you know what? Like right now, I hope in our society, you're feeling some anger. I hope that right now you're feeling some grief. Like those are two emotions that should, in my opinion, be on the table to be experiencing right now, or even just discomfort.
Right.
But being able to move through them, that's where the power is, when they don't own you and you can feel them, you can be present with them, you can honor them, you can let them have a voice and be there and then be able to move through them. So that's why it's like, I think when we start using that good, bad wording, that's when we see that shame and go, oh man, well, I should just get over this, or I should hurry up through this, or I shouldn't be feeling this. And that's that's in that shame.
It's that resistance too. Whatever you resist persists. So if you're resisting that emotion, and I think that we have a lot of ways. So like when you talk about ruminating, I think what you're saying is, you keep kind of rehashing the story about why you feel this way. I mean, sometimes you just feel something, but you're not even in touch with the reason why you feel it. And so we automatically are looking for answers instead of just being a witness to experiencing whatever we're experiencing. We've got to reach for some reason why we feel this way and then continue to rehash that story over and over again about like, this is why I should, and this is why else I should feel, and this is why else I should feel. And you just keep, is that kind of what you're saying when you talk about ruminating in it?
Yeah. It's almost like, another word we could use for this is looping. So it's almost like the hamster wheel thinking, where we're looping and we never get off the hamster wheel and we're just sort of replaying and replaying and replaying. Or even if we're not replaying, we're looking for outside evidence to confirm the way we feel. And so we're just sort of trying to find some drivers to drive this in deeper into sort of validating what we're feeling. And so we're saying, oh, well, see, look, this is happening in the world, or that's happening in the world, or this is happening to me. This is in my environment right now. Well, of course I'm going to feel X, Y, Z. And so we kind of begin to shift some I don't know that I would say blame, but we start to validate how we feel. And that keeps us in the loop. That keeps us in that rumination of revisiting it. And kind of like I was mentioning earlier, like putting the gasoline on it. It's like we're feeding it. We're really giving it energy. We're putting and creating focus on it, which just amplifies it. It's just like turning up the noise, turning up the volume, increasing the vibration within our bodies of that emotional experience. And it escalates it. That's where we go. I talk about different zones of experiencing emotions, where it's like, if it's neutral, it's green. You kind of get a little bit triggered, that becomes a yellow. You start getting agitated, that becomes an orange. And then all of a sudden you're in red, which is full blown, in it, can't get out of it kind of thinking. And to me, being able to kind of catch it when it's about at a yellow, like, oh, isn't this interesting that I'm getting triggered here? And kind of going through that presence process of sitting with it, acknowledging it. And sometimes we don't need to know, like you said, sometimes we don't need to know where it comes from. Sometimes it literally is an activation of old memories of past feelings based on something in our environment that really doesn't have to do with anything. And so sometimes it's helpful to go back and find the source. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not as constructive to do that. But it really is really interesting when you start noticing the things that give this emotion life, that make it more intense. Even things like social media, just scrolling and reading more, consuming more noise, consuming more news can begin to escalate it as well. So kind of finding out those things that escalate it for us and detaching from that, kind of breaking that looping.
Yeah. So what happens if we don't let ourselves go ahead and experience and feel these emotions?
Well, I think we've mentioned it a little bit in that oftentimes there is a adverse reaction when we ignore what we resist persists, like you mentioned, Victoria, earlier. And what I find that happens is that when we work really hard to not feel what we're experiencing, then there's different ways we have to handle the emotional experience, because it's not that it's not happening. We're choosing not to engage with it. So it's like there's a real form of denial here. And so in order to quiet that vibration, the emotional vibration, to quiet the internal voice that's happening, we have a lot of strategies for that. And this is where it almost like you hear people talking about it comes out sideways. To me, this is when that happens, is when it's almost like if we were to imagine taking a beach ball and we're in a body of water and we're pressing down that beach ball that's intended to float, and we're like with all of our might putting it under the water, like you will go under the water, we're pressing, all of a sudden it's going to pop up and it's going to hit you in the face. And so what's challenging is the amount of effort that it takes to push that beach ball underneath of that water. And that's kind of when we talk about, what's happening below the surface is kind of how I like to think about that. In order to not feel that, we have to do things that are not helpful to our bodies and our minds. So this is where numbing, coping, and addiction come into play. When we try to essentially distract ourselves in some way from the reality of what we're experiencing internally. So we drink. And ladies, I'm going to call you out because I know I've been guilty of this before, but it's like, in the day with a glass of wine, right? And don't get me wrong, I love my cocktails, I love my wine. But when it becomes to the point where it's an escape and it becomes like, we've got to do it. And it's really tricky, right? Because it can be super socially acceptable, especially during COVID. It's like, 3:00 rolls around. It's like, well, it's close enough to 5. Let's go for it, And it's that moment. And believe me, I've done that plenty of times, but it's like, I'm aware, like, ooh, I don't want to feel the fact that I don't want to be in this day any longer. It's been too overwhelming. Right. So there's that going on. There's overworking. And as a working entrepreneur, this is when I fall into it a lot.
Me
when
too.
I'm feeling uncomfortable. Right? Yeah. It's like that anxiety starts going, oh, let me get on my computer because I know that will push it away. I'll get to distract myself for a while. It could be Netflix. It could be shopping. It could be engaging in sexy conversations with strangers, when you're in a committed relationship. It can be all kinds of different ways that we leave the moment. And then if you think about beyond that.
So we don't have to feel that discomfort.
Yes, exactly. Like, I don't want to feel what's happening, so I'm going to go do something else. And I don't have shame around that. I think we all do this in different ways. And I think it's can be honestly very effective, but it's only effective for so long, right? Like, it works, but it only works for so long until something happens where we simply can't ignore it anymore. And so that's kind of where, if we don't deal with it in real time, and again, we don't deal with it because we think it's going to be too painful. Like, I want to bring like a lot of compassion to that. We're really afraid. Like, it makes sense. Like, I have so much compassion. It's like, well, of course you don't want to deal with that because you're afraid that your whole life's going to fall apart if you go there, right? So it's like a legitimate fear. But I think when we can come from a place of bravery in working with a coach, working with a therapist, working with a hypnotherapist, somebody who can help you walk this safely, we can begin to find that it's not so scary after all. And if we do it consciously more often, it really doesn't, there's not the backlog of all the things that we've been stuffing for decades. So it comes out sideways and it always comes up. A lot of times it comes into the body, dis-ease, illness, pain, all kinds of health complications that shows up there big time. So to me, the cost is really, really high because the root to me of anything is always, we're not dealing with the emotional stuff that's showing up.
Hello, this is Victoria Gallagher. I hope you're enjoying listening to the Power of Your Mind podcast. As a way of thanking you for listening, I'd like to offer you a one-time discount of 35% off your first order at hiptalk.com. Just go to hiptalk.com and enter the code PODCAST in the discount code area in your cart, and you'll receive 35% off your first order. Thank you so much for listening to the Power of Your Mind podcast. I totally agree. For that reason, I'm almost like scared to, hold on to something for too long because, I mean, if you can literally feel it in your body, then I feel like it's already starting to have some sort of an impact. Now, you might have to chip away for a while. You might have to hold that negative feeling and not let it go for a long, long time before it does actually do something physical to your body. But I feel like if you hold it too long, eventually something is going to, I mean, if you can literally physically feel it, it's doing something, on some level.
Well, and I think also even beyond just like, let's say, because I could hear somebody saying, well, I'm healthy. Like, I've never experienced any of these things. So why do I need to go into that? And the question, the rebuttal for that would be something like, yeah, but are you really living? As Brene Brown talks about, she says, we cannot selectively numb. We cannot numb the dark without numbing the light. And I think that's really important because when we just try to not feel what's hard or uncomfortable or some of those more difficult emotions, we're also numbing the good emotions. When we shut down, we can't selectively shut down. It shuts down everything. So to me, even if health isn't the thing that's showing up for you, to me, it is a sad reality that we aren't living fully alive when we are numbing out the hard things. We don't get to experience the joy or the happiness or the fulfillment if we're unwilling to feel some of those more uncomfortable emotions. And so it's sort of like, it all comes together, it's either like you get it all or you get none of it. And
well, it's like you remove the light switch altogether. You don't get to turn it on or off. It's just gone.
Yeah. And like, to me, forget the health stuff. Cause sometimes that's like, so far in the future, it's not enough pain to associate with like, oh, that maybe never happens. But to me, I'm like, I want to be alive. I want to be here for the good stuff. I want to be here for those moments of preciousness and celebration of life. And in order to do that, I've got to be online, so to speak, quote unquote, online. I've got to be awake and open to it all so that I can experience that life.
Yeah. I mean, that's why we have the whole array, the whole spectrum of emotions. And, I mean, they're meant to be felt. They're meant to be experienced. So how can people learn to feel again?
Yeah. For me, I feel like it's a process, and I'll kind of break it down in 4 steps to kind of make it really, really simple. And it is an acronym called KISS, KISS. And this is something that I created, but it's sort of a universal mindfulness practice. Okay. So there's different ways that you could, sorry, it's not called KISS. That's the 4th step. Sorry. It's called BACK, BACK. And I'll get to the KISS at the end. BACK. So this is where I'm like, let's jump to the KISS. So it's 4 steps to processing your emotions. And so the first, and the idea with BACK, the analogy or the acronym of BACK, is to come back. To come back, to invite ourselves to come back to the present moment, to come back to this time here and now. So the first, and I'll just go through these briefly. The first is to breathe. So the B stands for breathe. And that's what we talked about earlier, where we just take that moment to notice, hey, I'm feeling something. This is happening. I'm feeling a vibration. I'm feeling a sensation. I've gotten triggered. Like I'm having an emotional experience. So that's the breathe, to notice. That's sort of the pause, to notice that I'm feeling something. And all of this is a practice of awareness. So in order to process and learn how to deal with emotions, it requires this mindfulness practice. So the second step here in this acronym of BACK is the A, and that is for allow. And the allow this is when we give ourselves permission to be in the discomfort, to allow what we're feeling without shame, without criticism, without judgment, to just witness, and we talked about this a lot today, just to witness what's showing up, to say, you know what, almost like a big giant yes to what is, a yes to what I'm feeling, to acknowledge that this is hard, or that I'm sad, or that I'm lonely. And so one of the questions I like to ask myself is, if I gave myself permission to feel, I am feeling ... If I gave myself permission to feel, I am feeling. So we sort of invite ourselves into allowing what is already here. Now, the third step is to the C and BACK, is to connect. And this is where we get curious. This is where we ask ourselves, like we talked about, Victoria, you were talking about that meditation practice of like, where do I feel it in my body? Like if I were to close my eyes and think about, okay, if I'm angry, what does anger feel like in my body? To connect with the sensation. Where do I feel it? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it sound like? What are the sensations of that emotion? To connect with it, to get curious about what it's saying, where it's coming from. And this is where we're connecting. We're seeking to understand, and we're listening. So oftentimes I'll sit in a meditative process where I'm either journaling this out, or I'm just, kind of hand on heart having a moment of saying like, okay, like I'm feeling this anger. I'm acknowledging it. I'm allowing it. And now let's get curious. Anger, what is it that you have to tell me? What are you trying to protect me from? What is it that you wish that I would know or pay attention to? Just get curious, to connect. And then the last step is to kiss. And this is the K of BACK. And this is where we bring our most tender, compassionate, loving self into the equation. It's like having a wound and we're going to kiss it. Think about like a loving mother. And it's like when your little girl comes up to you, or your little boy comes up to you and says, Mommy, like I scraped my arm. Let me kiss it. Let me kiss it. And it's this moment where we allow ourselves to meet ourselves with compassion. Like I do a lot of work around inner dialogue with myself of like, oh, honey, I know this hurts. I know this is hard. I know this is scary. I hear you. And this is where we validate the experience. And I like to say a little phrase, which is, I hear you. I see you. You matter. I hear you. I see you. You matter. And I'm saying that to the emotion, that person that is experiencing that fear, that anger, whatever. I hear you, I see you, and you matter. And that's what it looks like to process through our emotions and keep coming back, keep coming back, keep coming back.
I love that. That's a great technique. So breathe, allow, connect, and kiss. And it's a really great comeback, come back to the present moment and experience whatever whatever you're experiencing. And, I believe that there is still a child inside of us all that's having these emotions. We weren't allowed to feel them. And now we can give ourselves that permission to, to be that parent that says, it's okay, honey. It's okay.
Yeah.
And let that, and let it out and move through it and heal it.
Yeah. It is so healing. I mean, it's like one of the most powerful things to do, to reparent yourself in that way and create space for your emotional experience and to really kind of work at letting yourself feel more, to be even aware that in any given moment, you're having an emotional experience. There's a spectrum. Sometimes it's more intense than others, but that like even now, even as we do this interview, I'm having an emotional experience related to what's happening. And so it's like we're bringing presence to something that is happening all of the time, but from a place of compassion and tenderness and loving. And it creates this, I just think of this expansive space, like all of me is okay. All of my emotions are okay. All of this has room to be welcomed with a tender heart, with love, receptivity, and for me to be able to validate that in myself, and then to lovingly walk myself, out of it, to process it, to experience it, and then move to the other side. And I think when we validate it, it's like all our emotions want is for us to acknowledge them. It's not that we have to like fix it or cure it or heal it in that moment. The validation is usually enough. And then we can move to a different emotional experience. Okay, now that I've been through that, how do I want to feel? Right. Do I want to have a different experience? Is this enjoyable? Is it not? Do I need something? Like if I'm feeling lonely, that's a great time for me to pause to say, okay, what do I need right now? Do I need to reach out to a friend? Do I need to reach out to my coach, to my therapist, to connect with somebody? If I'm feeling angry, finding a way to express that in a healthy way. If I'm feeling anxious, to tend to the part of me that is afraid. Like there's usually a need that we can meet very quickly when we're experiencing these emotions. So I think that's another part of this process, is asking ourselves, what do I need? What does that emotion need to feel safe and calm?
Absolutely. And I think, our emotions are also so connected to just our gut instincts and our intuition. And, we may not feel like we know the answers, but if we allow ourselves to work through the guidance of our emotions, we may come up with answers, and we may not, and we may have to just sit with that for a while, and the answers will be revealed to us.
Yeah, it's powerful feedback. I mean, our emotions quickly will tell us kind of what our yes is and what our no is internally and through our intuition. I think our emotions are our guidance system. And when we can tap into that and really listen, like when we meet somebody, there's a vibe, we feel it. Is either a good connection or not. And to learn to trust that. When we walk into a building and there's an icky feeling, get out of there. Right? It's like those emotions are really helpful feedback. When we're afraid about something, when we're embarrassed about something, when we're feeling shame or whatever, great feedback, opportunity for deeper healing. So to me, when we can befriend our emotions, oh man, like a whole new spidey sense opens up, and we can feel and sense the world in a whole new way that gives us kind of a competitive advantage, honestly, into what's happening beyond what somebody's saying. It's pretty cool.
That's so true. I was literally getting ready to say almost exactly what you said, because it's like if you honor your emotions, they will honor you. And it's a two-way communication system that will help lead you into really where you want to be, and keep you away from where you don't want to be.
Yeah. I mean, it really is the barometer for what you're experiencing in life. And that's why I love to say that word, to befriend your emotions, that they're a beautiful, wonderful ally that is there to help you, to guide you, and offer that instant feedback. And the more we can become in tune with the emotional language of our bodies, the emotional language of our mind, and that energetic experience, it's so powerful and creates really deep healing.
Cool. Well, on that note, this has been a really enlightening, timely conversation. And so I'm really happy that I got to have you on our show. And I want to make a recommendation to our listeners to go check out your website, maryhyatt.com, where you are giving away this free anxiety kit, because I know so many people are dealing with this, including myself. I've dealt with it, and I went to grab a copy of that myself, and so I'm really excited. It comes with tell us what we're getting here.
Yeah, so it's an anxiety recovery kit, and one of the things that we didn't talk about, but that I love to do, is guided meditations. So in this kit, you're going to have 3 different guided meditations specifically for anxiety, including one for panic attacks, which is great, including also, in addition to the meditations, a breathing exercise that instantly will lower your stress, your anxiety, and your cortisol levels. It's a 3-minute exercise. And then also essential oil blend recipes for anxiety as well. So if you want to grab that, you can go to the website, but if you want a direct link, it's maryhyatt.com/recovery kit. maryhyatt.com/recovery kit.
That's very generous. That's a very generous offer. And I think right now, it's so timely for people who are, experiencing all of that. So thank you so much for being on the show and enlightening us on the power of our emotions, and how, you've given us some tools, and I love it when guests are able to actually provide us with tools and techniques that people can use to, to work with the power of the mind and of course the power of the emotions. And so thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a pleasure.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with your friends. And once again, be sure to subscribe to the Power of Your Mind podcast if not already. We can be found as Hip Talk on all our social media accounts. So like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, subscribe on YouTube, and sign up for your free self-hypnosis video training course at hiptalk.com. Be sure to subscribe to the Power of Your Mind podcast, and you'll be instantly notified the moment the next podcast becomes available. Also, please be sure to leave a rating and a review to tell us how you're enjoying these episodes, and that way you're making a contribution toward others getting to share in this valuable information. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon. You've been listening to the Power of Your Mind podcast, brought to you by HipTalk.com, Personal Growth Club, and HypnoCloud apps available at iTunes.